My name is Cooke. I'm an Organisational Development Manager at Cardiff University, and I'm here today to talk to you about effective presentations and to think about how you can get the most out of the presenting that you do. Effectively, what we're going to look at through this period of time is a series of points around making sure that you deliver in the best way that you possibly can. But although it seems like the standard basic things to do, that is very much where we're going to start. We're going to start off by covering the basics and really thinking about how you can get the best out of the audience, how you can be prepared to present, and how you can appreciate and get the most out of the venue. We're going to think about you as a presenter and what you actually need to do, how you can think about your body language. We're then going to look at some areas such as handling nerves, dealing with question and answer sessions, which can be the areas that people feel a little bit daunted by. We're going to think about how we make sure we're as prepared as possible, and then my biggest piece of advice to you is making sure that you get plenty of practice in. So they're some of the areas that we're going to look at throughout this session. As I said right at the top of the list, what we're going to start off by is thinking about covering the basics. And what I mean by that is thinking about things such as the audience. So this is very much the first place that we start, and we think about, well, actually, what do we need to consider when we're looking at a group of people? It may not necessarily be a large audience like this that you're presenting to. It may be a group of 5, 10 people. It may also be in a meeting context, because a lot of the time people forget that when you're in meetings, that's just as much an element of presentation as it is when you're standing up in front of a group of people in a room. So some of the basics to consider about the audience. Firstly, how many? One of the things I've just talked about, from a practical point of view, it's getting you to think about what kind of equipment do you need, if you're issuing handouts, if you're thinking about some of the more interactive elements that you're going to do. That's an important first point to consider. Secondly, who else is speaking? Are there any other speakers? What's the context of their delivery? How does your subject fit in with that? Does it fit in with that, or is it a completely different topic? What do they know about your subject? So what are the audience aware of? Will they understand some of the language that you use? Will you need to go from basics on that language? Will they have an understanding of the context that your talk is in? What's the most appropriate style? Is your audience expecting very formal presentation? Is it a more informal situation? Does, again, some of these elements above, the size of the group, the type of speakers who are available, does that impact your most appropriate style? What mood are your audience in? This can be a really difficult balance, I suppose, between, is it post-lunch, is it first thing in the morning, is it last thing at the end of the day? I often say to people that if you try and actually break down into small sections the times of day that are really optimal, they're actually really, really tiny. So one of the things for you to think about is, how do I ensure that I am keeping my audience engaged? How do I ensure that no matter what the circumstance may be, that the audience is still taking on board the information that I'm sharing? What has already been said? So a little bit tied back to any of the speakers at the top there. What is the information that's being conveyed already? Does that information have an impact? Does that information contradict what you're saying? Does that matter? So thinking about that and thinking about finding out what you can before you go. Who is speaking directly before you? Are they going to link to you? Is somebody else doing the introducing? How is the structure going to work so you can ensure that you are delivering in the best way to the audience that you've got in front of you? And also, and almost the first and the last, what is the audience expectation? What are they expecting to get from you? What are they expecting to learn? Is it a reminder of old information? Is it new information? What does that look like? So considering all of these things from that basic premise of what do your audience want? What are they expecting? What we then need to think about is we need to consider, right, okay, how do I make sure I get these people on board in the best possible way? One of the people who was the absolute master at this was Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs had the ability to make people eat out of the palm of his hand. And the video extract that you've got here is when he launches the iPad. Now, granted, the audience he's got in front of him are an audience of people who are very, very interested in his product. But listen to his delivery, listen to the words that he uses, listen to how he utilises pauses, how he changes the tone of his voice. And what you'll see is the reaction he gets is tied into that. The other thing that's interesting for me in the way that he works with his audience with this clip is the way that he uses graphics. They're not complicated, they're very simple, and importantly, and we will talk about this later on when we look at presentation aids, he is the main event. His presentation aids are simply supporting the message that he wants to convey. So have a look at that video clip and see what you think about the way that he engages with the audience. The next thing to consider and to think about in relation to presentations is the venue that you're in. Now, this can be quite difficult, particularly if you're being asked to present somewhere where you're not aware of the venue. But what I would say to you is we've got lots of ways now of finding out what venues look like. We've got lots of ways of doing things like 360-degree tours on hotel websites, on conference centre websites. So where you can, try and find out what exactly, what does the venue look like so that you are prepared and it doesn't throw you off your mark and it doesn't make you more nervous than you may already be. There are alongside that some of the basic things we need to think about. So from a perspective of the venue, firstly, really practical, will you sit or stand to make your point? This is probably tied into what I was saying earlier on about the actual audience themselves and thinking about the appropriate style. There are times when it's more appropriate to stand or sit. So think about how it's going to work in this venue. If it's a very big venue, sitting needs to be staged in a very, very precise way so that you still are able to deliver in an effective way. Think about the lighting in the room, particularly if you're using presentation equipment. Is the room too light or is it too dark? What impact is that going to have on exactly how you deliver in your presentation? Are you visible to everyone? It's a very simple thing to think about, but it's absolutely fundamental. Your body language, your eye contact, they are all the more stronger if you are actually able to do that and engage with the audience. And we will talk about that later because people, I think, worry about the challenge of very, very large rooms and what the impact will be if they're trying to do some of that interaction. But it's really, really fundamental that you place yourself in a position where everyone can see you. So think about that when you're positioning yourself in the venue. Are there any distracting noises outside? There's not often a lot you can do about this, but what it is worthwhile thinking about is, okay, if I know that I'm next to a train line, if I know that I'm next to a very, very busy place of work, how am I going to manage those potential distractions? Am I prepared for them? Do I know that they're going to happen? Always really worthwhile finding out as well if there's going to be any kind of fire drill. There's nothing more distracting than that. Is everyone comfortable? But I always say not too comfortable. You want people to be able to relax, but you don't want people to be so comfortable that they will lose their focus too easily. Will you need refreshments? Again, very basic practical arrangement, but an important one, particularly if you're part of a very long day. Are your presentation aids visible? Are you using the right presentation equipment for the right presentation? And as I said, we'll talk about that later on as well. And then is there disabled access available? So are you able to actually ensure that all of your attendees can actually be at the venue and get the most out of the situation? Last point in this basics section is around preparation. So what does that mean? Why is it important? A lot of the time I say to people that presentations is around the P word, it's around preparation and it's around practice and doing as much of that as you possibly can. We all have busy jobs, we all have busy lives, so a lot of the time this is the area that sometimes we leave until the last minute and that doesn't help us. It doesn't help us deliver the best presentation we can. It doesn't help us if we're struggling with things like nerves or if we're struggling with kind of situations where we're wondering how things are going to happen. So some of the basic tips for you to think about in relation to preparation. Your starting lines. Make them good, make them solid. Think about how you're going to engage your audience. If you're after some really practical tips around that, then it really is the basics of just who you are and what you're going to talk about. Think about the aim versus the subject. So a lot of the time people will look at preparation and look at thinking about, right, how do I kick this presentation off? And they'll think, well, what's my subject? What am I talking about? What I try and encourage people to do is think about the aim at the end of the situation. So think about what do you want people to leave this room remembering or thinking about your topic. That's your aim. And then work your preparation towards that aim and towards getting the best out of the situation that you can. I said before, There will be elements of this that will sound a little bit like a stuck record through this presentation, but preparation is absolutely vital. Place yourself in a good position. And as I said, if you're really concerned about that start, think about who you are, where you're from, and what you're going to talk about. It's a good basic kick-off, but it works. And take your time over it as well. You will have a core central message to any kind of topic that you're presenting on. Use that central message and repeat it as you go through the presentation. It gives stability, it also gives structure over a longer term to the presentation that you're delivering. And make sure there's a mix of information, particularly because if you think back to your audience, the chances are that you will have a range of people in the room who will know different levels or different stages of information. So mix old with new, give yourself the opportunity to share as much as you can with the audience. Give plenty of examples. Make people see that there's actually a concrete scenario to this. So, if you're talking through a particular topic, give them some examples that represent that and give them an idea of exactly what you're talking about. And if you're looking for structure, this isn't a bad one to consider. So you're making a statement about your topic, you're giving examples, you're doing an explanation, and you're doing a summary. And you can almost use that as building blocks to build up a longer, more developed presentation. But always make sure you consider and you include those examples. They're really important. They give credibility to your presentation. Longer talks, clearer structure, and more variety. We know historically that attention spans are not massive, so we need to make sure we do this well if we are presenting for a longer period of time. Use bullet cards. Don't be tempted to have everything on A4 sheets of paper, mainly because if nerves is an option, you'll find that as you move, the paper moves and it won't help from a presentation point of view. So if you do need cues, use bullet cards. They're good to hold on to, they're small, and they're much more sturdy. And don't be afraid of using them either. I think that there's a tendency for people to think, well, I've got to deliver without any kind of prompt. If it's going to help you, then stick with it and use them well. Make sure that there are keyword prompts on them. This is important from a preparation point of view because what you don't want to do is do a lot of talking word for word. It sounds stilted, it doesn't sound like a natural delivery. Avoid jargon and acronyms. We are brilliant at this. We love acronyms. We love acronyms around topics. Unless you are absolutely sure that your audience has a clear understanding of those acronyms or that jargon, then make sure you clearly explain everything. And what you can always do, and many people have done, is explain something once and then use the acronym, but you need to ensure that you don't make the assumption that people will understand. Discard any material that isn't essential, particularly if you're on a very strict time scale. So get rid of stuff that you don't need, and also because it starts to feel like you're filling time just for the sake of it. And finally on this section, end memorably as well. So do a good summary. Think about reiterating some of your main points. There shouldn't necessarily be any new information in that summary, but it gives you an opportunity to highlight the things that matter to you again. So that's thinking about the preparation. To try and help you with this, one of the things that I do is, I'm now going to do exactly what I've just said not to do, and that's to give you an acronym, but I am going to explain what this is for. You'll see here, SPAM, the very lovely attractive tinned meat, but I actually use it for a different purpose. The acronym along the top I use is situation, purpose, audience, and method. So if you're getting to a stage where you've got to present, you're thinking, right, what are the key things I need to remember? Then this acronym helps you. So the situation, where are you? Where are you doing this delivery? The purpose, why? Why are you delivering this presentation? Your audience, who's going to be there? And then finally, your method, how? How are you going to deliver? So if you're looking for that prompt, then SPAM is your prompt. Consider the key things that you need to take into account. Okay, presentation aids next, and we've talked about those a little already. The first basic question that I always say to people is, can you use them? Don't place yourself in a situation where you are putting more pressure on yourself by actually making things more challenging by using something that you're not used to or you're not familiar with. So the first question with presentation is always, can you use them? Secondly, keep it basic, keep it simple. Don't make it too complex. It doesn't always come across well no matter what type of presentation aid you're using. and it's much more visually effective by keeping it simple. Make sure you've got a specific purpose for it. I will use a mixture of equipment. I'll use PowerPoint, I'll use video. If I've got smaller groups, I'll use flip charts, but they've all got a specific purpose and a reason. So think about, well, actually, what's going to help me to deliver? And remember what I said earlier, you are the main event. Presentation aids are merely the supporting act, so they shouldn't overshadow what you're talking through. Prepare yourself for technical failure. You can absolutely guarantee that at some stage when you're presenting, something will go wrong. So have a backup plan. Make sure that you know your information well enough that you're not reliant on the presentation equipment that you're using. Make sure that you've got that flexibility of being able to deliver things in a different way. Make sure there's variety. Use colour. Use things that actually enable you to get the audience to be a little bit more engaged. So think about that variety. And as I said, utilise that colour. The other thing that's important, and there's a lot of this used when we use certain types of presentation aids, such as PowerPoint, is thinking about the graphics that we use and thinking about how we use these pieces of equipment to represent ideas. Something like that is great. It goes back to this point that I was making a moment ago about keeping things simple. It's a simple graphic, it's to the point, you know, it doesn't mean that it's complex to view. However, what you do want to avoid is something like that. Hugely complex, lots of small writing, won't necessarily mean anything to your audience. So think about how you utilise graphics. And then the really basic thing of size. Whatever you're using, whether it be flip chart, whether it be PowerPoint, whatever it may be, something that size in a big room is obviously not going to convey. And exactly the same way, that may be a little bit extreme as well. So think about how you balance that. From a really practical point of view, particularly for people who've got any kind of visual impairment or people who've got any kind of learning difficulty, Arial font is a very good basic font to use. And from a size point of view, make sure that it is legible in whatever room you're in. If you really want to look into this, there's a lot of research that's been done around background colours and colours of text on backgrounds as well for different groups of people. So it's worthwhile reading around the topic and finding out what's seen as being acceptable. And tying back to the basics that we talked about, think about who's in your audience and what do you need to consider in relation to that. There are lots of different types of presentation aids that we use, and I'm not going to go through all of them in this presentation. But it's worthwhile remembering that they've all got their pros and they've all got their cons. They've got things that, you know, make them hugely, hugely useful, but then they've got other things that can limit them. So as an example, flip chart, you wouldn't necessarily want to use with a big audience in a very large room because it wouldn't carry very well. You'd be much more likely to use something that was a larger visual like PowerPoint for that. In exactly the same way, depending on what you're doing, things like plain whiteboards here or interactive whiteboards here, or for that matter chalkboards, to a certain extent you've only got so much space. So when that space is full, it's full. And then we've got some of the more basic things that we've used historically, so overhead projectors and slide projectors. You know, really good for simple plain visuals. And then if you want to do something that's more interactive, you've got the type of equipment like video camcorders. So it's thinking, right, what's the most appropriate, and I mentioned this earlier, what's the most appropriate piece of equipment for what I'm trying to deliver? So consider that when you're thinking about how you deliver your topic. Now, the video that you can access now is what I think a really good example of remembering to be flexible in the way that you deliver. This is a TED talk. For those of you who have not heard of TED, TED is a series of conferences around the world. There are small ones called TEDx. We've had one in Cardiff for the past 2-3 marches, and it gives people the opportunity to get up and talk about their topic. And this is a TED talk from Cannes a few years ago by a gentleman called Hans Rosling. Now, Hans Rosling is a well-known man who talks about population growth. But what he does in this is he utilises some really plain, simple equipment to stress his points. I can guarantee you that you'll probably never quite look at an IKEA box in the way that you will after you've watched Hans talk. But what I'm hoping you see is that it doesn't have to be complicated. You can do some very simple things and it has a really striking visual effect. So have a look at what Hans does with his equipment. Okay, timing, a key element, whether it be presentation at a job interview, whether it be presentation at a conference, whether it be delivering a paper at a meeting, everybody's given a certain amount of time. And there's also the challenge of the way that time impacts us from an internal point of view. So I'm just going to talk through some of those points now. Firstly, fairly general point that I think that we're familiar with, bad timing causes dissatisfaction. It doesn't help from a delivery point of view. It doesn't necessarily help from an audience participation point of view. So make sure we know how long what we're talking about is going to take. Secondly, there's a fairly general spoken contract that you speak for so long and they will listen for so long. Longer talks are more challenging, which is why one of the things I said at the start was thinking about what's the structure that you create. How do you ensure that that helps you deliver within that time frame? Speakers have high adrenaline levels. When you're stood up here, your adrenaline is racing. It's one of the things that helps you deliver. It's one of the things that helps you perform. So utilise that positively, but also make sure that you are staying in control and that you're aware of how long something is going to take you to deliver, because that adrenaline has an impact. And the people who are sat in the audience in front of you have very low adrenaline levels, so they're coming at it from a completely different perspective. Talks which end on time or a few minutes early are always welcome. So think about aiming just slightly under the time scale, being aware of how your rhythm is, being aware of how your delivery is. If you run out of time, then bring your presentation to an end. Don't keep going, don't run over, particularly important in interview situations. I've sat in a couple of interview scenarios where people have presented, run massively over the time, and it really isn't popular, and it certainly doesn't help in that environment. Inner time is disrupted by adrenaline. I was talking about that a moment ago. Think about making sure that you stay in control of your time from a point of view of what works for you. There are some people who will do presentations where there's a ribbon bar that runs along the bottom and it tells them how long they've got for each slide. So some people like to do that. Some people like to ensure that they're placed where there is some kind of clock which gives them an indication of what the time is. So make sure you keep a check on that. Any subject can be made to fit any length of time. When I do this as a longer course, one of the things that I say to people is, right, take the topic that you've come with, break it down into a 5-minute presentation, a 15-minute presentation, and then a 25-minute presentation. And it's really making you focus on what are your key points. So, if you're challenged by timing, sometimes sitting down and making yourself do that is a positive thing. Break your topic down. What would you say if you only had 5 minutes to talk about it? An hour is the limit of attention. I think some people will probably challenge me on that and say it's probably quite a bit shorter, but at an hour you are going to struggle to keep people's attention. It's why variety is so important when we talked about using presentation aids and when we talked about preparation. Audiences can only listen for 5 to 10 minutes without wandering. It takes quite a lot for people to really focus for a long period of time. I think from a personal perspective, some of the most powerful things that I've seen where the presenter has had the audience completely wrapped in their hand have been personal stories, have been emotive stories. So think about how you can, get that audience attention over a long period of time. Okay. We've talked about the audience, we've talked about timing, we've talked about the venue, we've talked about equipment, but actually, as I've alluded to a couple of times, the most important person in this scenario is you. So it's about your body language, it's about the elements that are key for you to engage with your audience. So we're going to look at a few of those now. We've got 4 sections here. Let's start off with posture. Posture is important from a point of view of making you look as though you're steady, that you're calm, and that you're actually able to deliver in a professional way. And this is whether you're standing or whether you're seated. So some of the good hints and good tips. Keeping your shoulders back, ensuring that you're not hunching over. It helps with your breathing, which also helps with another point that we've got up here, which is voice. So keep your posture steady. If you are standing, keep your feet shoulder width apart. It's a good A-frame steady stance. Also ensure, from a posture point of view, that you're not doing too much moving from one side to the other, okay, or too much pacing around. I've got a video to show you in a moment which will enable you to see how that can potentially be distracting. We'll go this way now, from a hands point of view. really quite challenging for some people. Some people like to do a lot of talking with their hands. It's keeping it to a balance. It's ensuring that what you're not looking like is an air traffic controller, because that will be very distracting. But emphasis is never a bad thing, and particularly if you're gesturing towards things. So if you're utilising this kind of equipment. So think about that. Try and stay away from too much hands in the pockets. Also try and stay away from, if you have a tendency to play around with blue tack or flip chart pens, keep them out of your way so you're not led astray. We'll go to eye contact next, so up here. From an eye contact point of view, it is your contract with your audience. Now, if you've got a fairly small group, then it's fairly straightforward to maintain that eye contact with individuals in the group. I think where people have more concerns from an eye contact point of view is when you have a very large audience. So if you're looking at, hundreds of people, what I'll tend to do is I'll section the room up into 4. And then what I do is I alternate my eye contact between front left, back right, front right, back left, and not in a circle, but every now and again my gaze will change. And what that enables you to do is it enables you to involve everybody in your audience. So that eye contact is important. And voice. It's our key form of delivery alongside eye contact and getting that engagement. So it's the basics around pace, around tone, so making that varied so it doesn't sound stilted. It's around variety from a point of view of where you pause. It's around ensuring that the volume is enough but not too much. It's around intonation of words and being clear and having that clarity. And when you combine these 4 key areas together, you have the ability there to really deliver from a personal perspective in the best way. And then you are supported by all of the things that we've already talked about. Now, I said to you a moment ago that I've got some videos in relation to this. The first one is another TED Talk. And this is Jamie Oliver. Many of you will be familiar with Jamie Oliver from a point of view of his work as a chef. But this is something that he did in the States a few years back when he was on his big crusade around the way that people eat. Now, I'm not going to say much more about this because I want you to make your own minds up, but he's got a very interesting delivery style at the start. And whenever I do this with a group, it really splits the reaction. Some people aren't put off by the way he delivers, some people don't even notice it, and some people are very put off. Make your own mind up, but it's interesting the way that he does deliver this talk. Alongside that, one of the things that we started to talk about then was about using your voice and how important it is. And historically, the way that people have delivered from a voice point of view has had a real impact. And one of the things that I wanted to show you, and normally my slides will not look like they're about to look, but I think this is a really important point in how important the voice is in delivery. When Margaret Thatcher was first in a position where she was running for Prime Minister, she had a conversation with advisors, and if any of you have seen The Iron Lady with Meryl Streep, this conversation is actually depicted in the film. And they said to her that if she didn't change her tone of voice, she would never be taken seriously as a politician, and certainly not as a potential Prime Minister. So she actually had training from the National Theatre, and this training, as it says here, was to lower the pitch of her voice to essentially make her sound more like a man, because at that stage in politics, it was believed that that would be what would make her more acceptable. There are some video clips for you to have a look at which feature Margaret Thatcher both at the start of her career and then towards the end of her career. And what I'm hoping you'll notice is how that delivery continued to change over her career. So it's just a really interesting piece of history that going back, that delivery tone has been a really, really important statement. Okay, at this stage, this is almost a little bit of a quiz for you. So, anybody have any ideas about what coulrophobia is? Well, to put you out of your misery, it is the fear of clowns. So I apologise if anybody's got that, because now you're going to be completely freaked out. Second one is thalassophobia, which is the fear of deep water. Third one is nyctophobia, which is fear of the dark. And then the last one is glossophobia. And glossophobia is the fear of public speaking. So it's a genuine, recognised phobia. I always say to groups whenever I do any kind of presentation training that the majority of people do not look forward to presentations. I am a strange and unusual individual from that point of view. But what we can do is place you in a position where you can deliver to the best of your ability, even though nerves may be an option. So, we'll have a look at that now. Some of them will seem very basic and practical. Some of them will seem like they're not rocket science in any way, shape or form, but they're important ones to remind you of. And the first one of that being, be organised. Make sure you know what you're doing, where you're going, what you're delivering. Be yourself. Now there's some challenges to this. There's some commentators and you'll see some videos that I've got in a little while that are very American politics based. I have a passion for American politics and there's some brilliant presentation examples in that. And there are various commentators who will say, actually, be yourself, but you need to deliver it in quite a performance way. But I suppose what we're talking about here is about being authentic and being true to yourself rather than trying to deliver something that you're not true to. Make sure you get your practice in. I've said this before, I'll say it many times over. It's that practice that helps with nerves. Don't forget to breathe. When we get nervous, we get constricted, we forget to pause, we forget to take moments where we can actually take in a good proper breath. So make sure that you take an opportunity to breathe whenever you can. Relax. It will sound like the most ridiculous thing I can possibly say, but try and place yourself in a position where you feel as relaxed as possible. So posture-wise, thinking about the way that you use your voice, thinking about the equipment that you have around you, try and get yourself as relaxed as you possibly can. In a slightly different setting, I was having a conversation with a colleague recently and she was going into an interview, and one of the things that we'd done 2 days before the interview is we'd done loads of practice around questions, and she actually said a couple of days after the interview it was the most relaxed she'd ever been because that practice had happened. Presentations are exactly the same. On a very positive note, she also got the job, so that was a good thing. Don't stand as though you're nailed to the floor. Move around. Not too much. Think back to Jamie Oliver. But don't look completely rigid. It's not a natural, relaxed state. Maintain your eye contact. We acknowledged how important that was. It's just as important when you're nervous, and you may be put off it, but make yourself do it. It does help with those nerves. And don't be afraid to pause. Quite often with pauses, the way that people respond is they think, oh, well, if I pause, it's going to seem like a massive gap that's going to last forever. It's not strictly true. To you, the pause will feel very long. It will feel natural. And with the pausing as well, one of the things that I say to people that helps is if you're using something like PowerPoint, when you turn over the slides, use that as an opportunity to pause and think about, right, what am I doing next? Use adrenaline productively. I said earlier on when we were talking about timing that adrenaline you have gives you the fire to perform. You know, lean on that, use it, it's good, it can be helpful. Visualise your audience. Various people have these lines of, you know, think of your audience naked. Never been something that I've ever particularly wanted to do. Can't imagine that that would help me in any way, shape or form. But what does help is thinking about what will this room look like full of people? How will I then handle that? See the venue if possible. We talked about this at the start. Know what the layout's going to be like. You know, where are you going to be positioned? It will help with the nerves. Rehearse your timings. Make sure you're not running over. And don't fall into the trap of just thinking, oh, well, I've sat at my desk or I've sat in my room and I've gone through it in my head. Do some standing up and actually speaking it out loud. The timing changes when you're actually doing the delivering. So make sure that you do some of that. Be positive. Approach it in a positive frame of mind. Believe that you can do it and don't apologise for things. So ensure that you're not apologising for something, or if you go wrong or if you get lost, your audience won't necessarily know that. So all that you then do is you draw attention to a mistake that they haven't realised you've made. Use your visual aids well. Again, I know it's a stuck record, but they are the supporting act. They are not the main thing. And don't use things that are going to make you feel even more agitated and stressed. Question and answer sessions. So you've delivered the whole presentation. You've got to the end and you've thought, fantastic. I'm at that stage where, you know, I can relax, I can, you know, think I've got that out of the way, and then I'll see what gets fired at me. Now that can be good to a certain extent because then people will relax into themselves and deal with the question as well, but don't go off your guard too much. There's some preparation around that. Listen carefully to the entire question. Don't make an assumption that you've heard 3/4 of it, oh yeah, no problem, I can answer that. Listen carefully to the whole question. You don't know when there might be a spin in it. Answer directly back initially to the person that's asked the question, then, with your eye contact, move around the rest of the group. It gives an acknowledgement to the person who's asked. Refer back to what you've already said. Use that as your evidence. Use that as your examples. So refer back to the content in your speech, particularly if you've got any questions related to specific topics. And don't worry about going back to the slide if it will help to emphasise the question you've been asked. Anticipate areas of questioning. I have a video for you in a moment of one of my favourite people, and it's also the video that ends the course, of one of my favourite ex-American presidents from not very long ago, and it's a perfect example of where questions have not been anticipated. It's a very good how not to do it. Be friendly. I think sometimes when we get to the question and answer session, people get very agitated, they get very frustrated, they get very nervous, and that makes them seem a little bit spiky and a little bit uncooperative. So be friendly. Always tell the truth. Don't be tempted to fabricate something, because you know there will, without doubt, be somebody in the audience who knows the answer and will have no qualms in saying it. Be careful of your body language. Don't get too defensive, so don't do in the crossing arms or crossing legs or anything like that. Keep that body language open. It's important. Keep things moving along. They can sometimes become stilted in question and answer sessions. So quite often what I'll do is, if I get to the end and I have a situation, and quite often it tends to be a couple of things, you'll either get lots of people put their hands up, in which case I'll try and plot out an order, and I'll say, right, I'll go there, there, there and there, so you know where you're going and they know. But also on the flip side of that, if nobody puts their hand up, I'll normally wait a few seconds and I'll say, not a problem, I'm going to be here at the end. If you want to ask anything then you can. Because some people don't want to put their hand up in a large room and ask a question. So give them different opportunities to do that. Listen to the entire question before you reply. Make sure that you've understood the whole context of it. And if it's a good question, say it's a good question. Credit the person for asking it. And I've seen a lot of that, a lot of where people will say, that's a really good question. Bridge from question to question. Now what I mean by that is, you'll have answered something and you'll say to the person, has that answered your question? You'll see what kind of response you get. Okay, let's move on to the next person. Okay, I know you had a question. So again, you're keeping things running. Going back to the point that I was saying about people sometimes nervous about asking questions, don't be afraid to allow people to write things down if they prefer, and they can pass that on to somebody else to read if they'd like, or it can be passed up to the front. And treat the audience as a single entity when you respond. You know, treat the audience as though you're giving the audience the entire attention for the entirety of that question. And if you approach it from those different ways, it will help you. As I said to you, a video clip for you. Let me give you a little bit of context before you watch it. At this stage in George Bush's presidency, it was at the time when they were pulling the Americans out of Iraq to give support to the Iraqi police so that they could start to manage and police their own country. And historically, going back before he was president, George W. Bush was involved with the ownership of a baseball team. So the question he's asked by the journalist in relation to his baseball team, but then he gets asked a very basic question around, is there anything he would have done differently looking back after 9/11? And just watch the way he handles the situation. All of the classic things that you don't do in a question and answer session, from language to body language, it's painful. And I have seen this, I don't know how many times now, and it still has the same reaction. Okay, to summarise. If you think about the basics, think about right back to when we started, and we talked about things like the audience, the preparation and the venue, there will be many bits of that where you will have sat and thought, well, of course, that makes complete sense, they're the things I've been doing, they're the things that I know. But it is those basics that are the grounders for getting us to present in an effective way. So when this is of you, and when we stand up and when we take that step towards presenting, we are as prepared as we possibly can be. We are in the right place, we're using the right equipment, our timing is right, we're managing our nerves as effectively as we can, and we're also ensuring that we're going to be able to deal with our question and answer sessions. And just for you to finish off, there's one final video. If for you to have a look at. And just remember, you know, we've just seen him a moment ago. The gentleman in this video was elected as President of the United States not once but twice, still couldn't deliver particularly well. So there is effectively hope for us all. I hope that the information that you've had over this period of time has been useful, and my biggest message to you would be, get practicing, take the opportunity, deliver whenever you can. Thank you very much.